Fires, tornadoes, volcanoes, tidal waves, meteorites. When these kinds of natural phenomena occur, they can be cataclysmic major events, bringing with them staggering loss of human life, tragic environmental devastation, destruction and hardship. In this sobering yet thrilling installment of Desperate Hours, our special focus is on geological disasters. Now, most natural disasters, including volcanoes and earthquakes, are of course geological disasters. But avalanches, landslides, blizzards and heat waves, they don't usually cause fatalities in the tens of thousands, do they? Don't be lulled into a false sense of security. While casualty counts might be lower, geological disturbances like landslides and heat waves can cause their fair share of misery. Let's begin with avalanches, the rapid flow of snow down a mountain or hillside. Afghanistan. In some parts of the country, temperatures can soar to 49 degrees Celsius during the summertime. But in the mountains, the snow falls thick and fast. There were 3 chains of avalanches that could be quickly categorized as geological disasters in the first half of this decade, in 2010, 2012, and 2015. The most recent avalanches in 2015 in Afghanistan's Panjshir Valley were virtually in a category of their own. Avalanches some 40 meters high totally submerged homes and entire villages. The hardy mountain people that live in this region had not seen anything as bad in 30 years. Over 280 people were killed, with many more injured and traumatized. As always with avalanches, but particularly in the Panjshir Valley, rescue and aid teams had to reach places not easily accessed at the best of times. It had been the same, if not worse, a few years before, when an avalanche in the northeastern Afghan highlands demolished a village, home to some 200 people. Most of the village was simply caked in snow. The nearest hospital was across a national border in neighboring Tajikistan. This is a place where most travel is either on foot or horseback, though of course there are some four-wheeled vehicles. But nowhere was safe when snow fell in a massive dump from just 40 meters above.
به تعداد 157 شهید انتقال داده شده و تعداد شهدا به می تعداد 157 رسیده. در این 157 135 تن جسد توسط پلیس پروان کشیده شده و متبقی 80 توسط پلیس بغلان به طرف بغلان انتقال داده شده.
Nearby villagers offered what help they could, but outside help only came days after the avalanche, when people from Darwaz district and 25 aid workers from Tajikistan arrived on the scene. In Pakistan, on the 7th of April 2012, an avalanche struck at a military base in the territory around the Siachen Glacier. 140 soldiers and civilian contractors were trapped under deep snow. Hopes were high they'd eventually be saved.
जो अभी टीम्स आई हैं स्विस और जर्मन जो कल पहुंची हैं, उन्होंने भी जाके उसको बाय एंड लार्ज ऑथेंटिकेट किया है कि जिस जगह पे आप डिगिंग कर रहे हैं बाय एंड लार्ज इट इज़ करेक्ट.
Only on May 29th did authorities officially declare the 129 soldiers and 11 civilian personnel were dead. Nepal is renowned for its mountains, especially Mount Everest, the largest mountain in the world. On Saturday, the 25th of April 2015, an earthquake in Nepal set off an avalanche on Everest, killing dozens. It was all too soon after the tragic events of April 2014, when an avalanche on Everest killed 16 Nepalese guides.
Our 3 members did not come back to that village. Next day we were said that some of our people are missing, and the search was on.
As a mark of respect for the victims, the Sherpa guides announced later that April they would not work on Everest for the remainder of 2014, and they stayed true to their word. Where were you in '62? With any luck, nowhere near Mount Huascaran in northern Peru. Because that's when a tidal wave of snow, ice and boulders swept down from Peru's highest mountain onto the village below, killing around 3,000 people and displacing thousands more in the region. A few years later, in one of the worst years on record for avalanches, the French ski resort town of Val d'Isère was pounded by a huge wave of snow that killed 42 people in its wake. Unfortunately, avalanches have little respect for human life. Neither does the landslide, another geological phenomenon, one that includes quite a broad spectrum of underground movements, such as rockfalls, the collapse of hillsides and slopes, and shallow debris flows. These can all be considered landslides. They can happen offshore, in coastal and onshore environments. While the scale of destruction from a landslide may sound less dramatic than an avalanche, landslides can also be devastating, not just to the environment, but also to the human spirit, leaving a trail of heartbreak and horror.
Bali, nahihirapan kami dahil sa yung katawan, almost nag-decompose na yung katawan. So, pag-lift namin, yung mababali na yung minsan yung paa, nabali na pag namin.
Durmiendo con el chocolate en Chile pegó. Me tumbó la pared de la casa atrás y sacó todo para afuera y nosotros arreglamos muchachos y salimos corriendo.
Who needs an avalanche? It's staggering when you consider the damage caused by landslides alone. Leyte Island in the central Philippines was devastated by a landslide that destroyed an entire village of 2,000 people. The people living around the island's tropical mountain terrain had suspected a landslide or avalanche was imminent. For weeks, they had evacuated their village. But when the heavy rain from a typhoon finally subsided, they returned to their homes. Only days later, tragedy struck. Hundreds buried alive by the slide. The impact was devastating. Huge difficulties were encountered by rescue teams trying to identify where people were buried and in keeping themselves safe, let alone finding survivors.
Mugayad ko nila basig makita nila mga patayng lawas ba. Sa akong pamilya, importante nga akong pamilya ba. Mga dinaan ko nila nga mugayad nito, uban ko. Patay buhay uban ko.
On July 30th, 2014, in an Indian village called Malin in the Maharashtra province, around 100 people were killed by a landslide. But was Malin another tragedy that could have been avoided with a little more preparation? Could it have been caused as a result of human action, like farming or road construction? And more than one reporter noted that the village of Malin is only a kilometer or two away from the backwaters of Dimbi Dam, an irrigation project finished in the year 2000. Measured a few days earlier, it had held 250 plus million cubic meters of water. That's a big enough volume of water to make anyone in the neighborhood very uneasy. A year later, in northwest Colombia, it wasn't the folly of man responsible for landslides, but the sheer volume of rain. It was that which was responsible for landslides that killed more than 80 people, with mud rushing into houses and smashing bridges.
La quebrada arrasó con mi hermana, mis sobrinos, y no los hemos podido encontrar. Esta es la hora en que solamente encontraron uno y ellos son 4.
The random cruelty and wanton destructiveness found in nature is truly overwhelming. But geological conditions don't even have to be as obviously destructive as avalanches and landslides to create havoc and heartache. A heat wave can be one of nature's silent killers. India is justifiably renowned for its hot climate, but the heat wave that scorched India in the middle of the decade was something else. The May 2015 heat wave was said to be responsible for 2,500 deaths, making it the second deadliest heat wave in India on record. For 2 miserable weeks, temperatures soared to nearly 45 degrees. In New Delhi, the 45-degree heat actually started melting roads. Day upon day, night after night, of searing temperatures hit the homeless, the elderly, and those who work outside the hardest.
गाड़ियाँ खराब हो रही हैं, ओवरहीट हो रही हैं गाड़ियाँ गर्मी की वजह से, पसीने बार-बार आना, गला सूखना, प्यास लगनी बार-बार, यही जनरली सारी प्रॉब्लम गर्मी में काफ़ी हो रही है.
With the temperature reaching to 47 to 48 degrees Celsius too, in some areas. Now the people have been advised through various mediums of communication to take adequate precautions in this regard. Mainly, not to venture out into the open during the hot sun.
But even at nighttime, the heat was stifling. When the monsoon season finally began, a little later than usual, it brought cool and refreshing rains and a welcome drop in temperature. These climatic effects are being felt in the United States as well. From North Dakota to Massachusetts, Washington, D.C. to Chicago, America had a scorcher of a summer in 2013. Temperatures in most US states rose above 32 degrees Celsius, and the humidity certainly didn't help matters. Some people, especially those on vacation, managed to find ways to make the most of the sizzling hot temperatures. but it was no day in the park for practically anyone who had to work outside all day.
105 degrees, stifling heat, sun barreling down on you. Just got to make your money.
The emergency department, we've had, definitely an increase in the number of patients presenting with, heat exhaustion type symptoms, heat cramps, just dehydration, being outside for a little too long, being a little too active outside. We've also had a few patients who've come in with heat stroke, so the most severe form of heat illness.
Of course, there are times when a heat wave is not quite so severe. People in Britain can look back with nostalgia to the lazy, hazy summer days of 1957, when the whole country experienced unusually high temperatures, up to 36 degrees Celsius throughout the entire month of June. Ah, the good old days in the UK, when a swimming costume just meant rolling your trousers up and sunblock meant tying a handkerchief around your head. Even heat waves had better manners in those days, it seems. But geological disasters and disruptions come in all shapes and sizes. Sinkholes must be one of the most curious geological phenomena mankind has ever encountered. A few years ago, in a remote village in Bosnia, the inhabitants were astounded when their local pond disappeared.
Ko ne zna, ja sam došao u petak ujutro 9:30, tek sam onda prilijetio, vidio da je otišla velika vrba, nema nigdje, potonula, jezero je nestalo, samo je krater ostao.
These mainly occur in what's called karst terrain, soluble bedrock like limestone or gypsum, which can be dissolved by water. Any hole in the ground which is created by erosion, from a few feet across to the size of a football field, can be considered a sinkhole. Most of them form slowly over time. Others, like the one in Bosnia, can appear suddenly.
I kad znamo kakve su karakteristike jedne i druge formacije, nije čudo što ima ovakva jedna pojava na ovom mjestu, jer ovo nije neuobičajeno da se javlja na kontaktu takve dvije geološke formacije, nije česta.
Some of the villagers, however, insisted on more colorful explanations.
Hasan je umro, ostalo iza njega nakon mjesec i po dana, evo sve ode za njim i tako to. Došlo mu je navodno čiji posle pečenja rakije da očisti vikendicu. Kaže, samo sam primijetila neki vjetar i kaže, kad sam pogledao po jezeru, babo moj po jezeru, u svrtak ide.
In human cost, sinkholes aren't as bad as they look, responsible for just a few isolated fatalities. Blizzards, however, a different animal altogether. A blizzard is a severe snowstorm with winds in excess of 56 kilometers per hour and almost no visibility for more than 3 hours. Blizzards can also occur after snowfall, when high winds cause whiteouts, fallen snow blowing around, and snowdrifts, huge mountains of snow, which decrease visibility. In the US, they've started calling these winter storms Snowmageddon. But winter whiteouts, like the January 2015 Northeast American blizzard, are no laughing matter. Juno, the unofficially named winter storm, was one almighty nor'easter that affected Canada and the central and eastern United States, and eventually parts of Greenland and Western Europe. On January 26, millions of people along the east coast began preparing for heavy snow, powerful winds, and coastal flooding. with a blizzard warning issued for a 400-kilometer stretch of the Northeast, including New York City and Boston. People were expecting the worst, and in many cases, they got it. There were, however, notable exceptions. When Juno finally hit, it wasn't quite with the ferocity expected. Now that said, 83 centimeters of snow fell in parts of northeastern Connecticut. Providence, Rhode Island got 43 centimeters of snow, and Portland, Maine was covered in over a meter of the white stuff. The Boston area was buried in more than 60 centimeters of snow.
I'm guessing there's probably 10 to 12 inches right now on the ground. And it's still coming down about 2 inches an hour, I'd say.
Yeah, we thought we were getting off easy this winter because we haven't had much snow, and all of a sudden we got the big blizzard, and then this, and it sounds like there's some more to come.
And yet New York, which had been bracing itself for the worst, was somehow spared. American meteorologists apologized for their big miss after the Big Apple was largely spared by Juno, with a not unusual January overnight snowfall of around 15 centimeters. With cars banned from the roads and public transport shut down, the city that never sleeps looked like a ghost town. But it's surely better to be safe than sorry. That same year, the holy city of Jerusalem was covered by a resplendent white blanket after the worst snowstorm there in decades. With up to 8 inches of snow piling up in the city and temperatures below freezing, schools and highways were closed.
A storm like that, I don't remember for a long time, and I'm living in Jerusalem for 38 years, and didn't see such a snow.
It was actually the most snow the city had seen since 1879. Jerusalem was brought to a standstill, and at the height of the storm, power cuts left 60,000 homes without electric heating.
For the old people, it's worse. Like for us, it's really fun because we don't get snow, but for old people, I think it's really hard, especially with all the electricity network collapsing and a lot of people got jammed in cars. So luckily, no one died.
Perhaps few people would choose to rhapsodize about the British climate, but actually, most of the time, it's quite mild and temperate. But in 1978, the southern and western parts of the United Kingdom were battered by blizzards and congested by snowdrifts. Many people were trapped in their homes for days. In Yeovilton, in the West Country, the military were called upon to fight with General Winter. Rescue operations were mounted by all 3 branches of the armed services, mainly consisting of dropping off food and supplies and airlifting the seriously injured to hospitals. So there you have it, our dangerous world, where geological mishaps, avalanches, landslides, heat waves, sinkholes and blizzards can spell disaster almost as much as the big cataclysms such as earthquakes, volcanoes, and tidal waves. It's enough to make you want to purchase that one-way ticket to Mars.